Light within my heart, light within my thoughts, light within my words. May one and all and everything, blessed and loved, ever be. Welcome. I am Sister Who. When I was a child, the phrase that I think I heard more than anything was, more than any other phrase, was that I wasn't good enough. That whatever I did somehow wasn't good enough, wasn't normal enough, wasn't something enough. At the time, we did not have the understanding of autism that we have today. And I think a lot of it may have been tied to that because, but somewhere, whether it was because of autism or whatever, at some point early in childhood, I somehow came to the conclusion that I was never going to be particularly good at satisfying people's expectations. That I was an individual and I was an anomaly and I would always be so, and it was up to me to make the best of it. One of the challenges with that in terms of the local subculture in which I grew up was that I sometimes jokingly call it the 11th commandment. Thou shalt be polite at all costs. And boy, did they mean at all costs. It was not about being honest. It was about being polite. It was not about being truthful. It was not about being anything good. It was about being polite. As long as it was polite, virtually anything was okay. And anything that wasn't polite or that seemed impolite or that seemed ugly somehow was supposed to be kept completely hidden and never shown to the public. The problem with that is that it left people like ticking time bombs with all this pressure building up inside, all these unresolved issues and emotional pain and so forth, to the extent that when I was in high school, I remember someone mentioning at one point that actually this pleasant little community that I lived in had the highest suicide rate in the entire state. And that if you really wanted to know what the state of the community was, you should talk to the emergency room nurses to see what sorts of cases were brought in by ambulance to the emergency rooms. Because what the emergency room nurses saw would be so radically different than the ways that people thought their town was. Closely aligned with all of that is this whole, what some people call ego issues. I think people wanted to be polite, wanted to present the pleasantness because they somehow imagined that by making it look nice and sound nice and whitewash all the problems and whatever, that somehow they could convince themselves that things really, that it was true somehow. It was a sort of denial, but it was as if they were not valuable, special, good, intelligent, whatever adjective you want to use, unless everybody looking at them thought they were. The problem, what I find central to what most people describe as ego issues, is the idea that one's definition and self-worth is anchored in somebody else, is anchored in how I am seen, not in how I am. As an autistic person, I know what I experience from the inside out, but I don't have any way of letting people see inside my mind. I can try to describe it, I can try to illustrate it with video or with cartoons or whatever, but unless at some point we actually meet a Vulcan from the world of Star Trek and have a Vulcan mind meld, or develop some supercomputer that can actually read minds and translate brain impulses into colors and shapes, and so that it's like having a television camera that actually looks inside someone's thoughts. Not inside someone's head, because what you would see is the brain, but to be able to see what someone is thinking or visualizing inside their head. That if they close their eyes, what do you see? I say the word coat and you see something that's dark brown or gray, or somebody else sees one that's tan. It varies completely from one person to the next. in trying to define self-worth and capability and should I attempt this? Well, I'm not any good at that. I remember in college hearing so many people say that, well, I can't sing because somebody told them they couldn't sing. And so they decided they couldn't sing. And I said, well, sing anyway. And they began to sing and they were fine. The only problem was that they ran into someone who said they couldn't sing, and what that person meant is that they couldn't sing opera. But opera is not the only kind of singing. There's country western, there's rock, there's folk music, there's as many different kinds of music as there are people. When I first learned about myself being gay and tried to figure out what it means to be gay, I had to come to an understanding that there are as many ways to be gay as there are gay people. And there are as many ways to be anything as there are people. When I expect others to do the work of telling me I'm special and valuable and I'm a worthy individual, when I was in graduate school, they basically told me that until, I mean, not in direct words, but the message I received all around me was that until you know to which category you belong, you don't know who you are, because they anchored identity in the categories instead of in the individuals. And I had to keep arguing with them that no, as an individual, I have qualities that none of the categories you have assigned to me have. In being autistic, I tend to be really direct and blunt about things. And some people find that helpful. I think it's a good thing because there are important topics and issues that need to be discussed openly that aren't getting talked about enough. And if somebody else isn't going to say them, then I'm going to say them. The corollary to that, unfortunately, is social difficulties, because I'm not very good at being polite at all costs. I'm more interested in being truthful and in being honest. And I try to find ways to do it as tactfully as possible, but not to compromise it. But I do from time to time run into people who do not want anyone to disagree with them, because what they are trying to hide is that they really don't have any confidence or knowledge in what they're doing. That they have been, through whatever combination of circumstances, put in a position of doing something that is beyond their ability. Somebody who is pushed into leadership and told to lead, but they really don't know how. They haven't received any training, they haven't read any books, they have no understanding of how to lead. As much as I agree with the chaplain that I knew briefly in college who said that sometimes the leader is simply the one who goes first, even that can be extremely difficult for some people. The idea of going first when no one has gone before, of blazing a trail, of making a trail where there is no trail, of making a door where there is no door. In trying to relate to people who have not learned what they need to learn, what they need to know, have not learned how to do the job that they've been asked to do, have been asked to do something that they should not have been asked to do because they don't know. And then if they do it long enough, it becomes this almost a legacy or a resume or a personal history that they now have to defend, because if anyone were to find out after all this time that they were not the way they've been presented, well, that would be terrible. And would anyone forgive them, and would everyone say, well, you lied to us? Well, maybe they didn't mean to lie, but maybe they were put in a situation that telling the truth would have cost them opportunities and admiration and support that they didn't feel they had the strength to lose. And I want to be sympathetic to all that, but my answer would not be to maintain the lie, but to instead look for the support that allows you to come out and be who and what you are. That the person who went into business because that's what their parents said they had to do, but they really belong in music. That's where their love is, that's where their talent is, that's where their aptitude is, that's where they can do better than 100 other people. but the reason they're not following their heart's desire and doing what they love is because somebody told them you need to be able to pay the bills, and the only way to do that is to go into business. Well, there are ways to make a living as a musician also. And there are a lot of in-between sorts of ways, whether it's being a music teacher until such time as you can be an actual performer, whether it's being running a sound studio where you do recordings, sometimes your own, sometimes other people's. There are a lot of different ways to work around the complex society in which we live. But the thing that sets that gift free within that person is being able to do what they love, finding a way to do it, and recognizing that there are 100 possible ways. All they have to do is find one that works. It's not true to say you can't do this. You have to do it my way. And having, if they were pushed into doing something they don't love and they resent it, it's all the more likely that they will respond very negatively to someone who says, "This, you're not doing it correctly. I know this, and you're not doing it right." The person who never wanted to be an electrician and does it passably, but not wonderfully, and then encounters someone who knows how to do it correct and notices a mistake that they made and points it out to them, and suddenly they're all irate and yelling at them and getting all upset at them. And an observer might write it off as an ego issue, that he's very insecure about doing wiring because he's the technician and you're not a technician, but I know the answer. And it's not about making that person feel bad because they don't know or they made a mistake, or they don't know the details of their job as well as one would hope. It's about remembering that each person is an individual, that there's something they love, and they may have been separated from that love for many years. As a nurturing, supportive society, we need to move to letting individuals find themselves, because the world in which I grew up specifically discouraged that. And if it did so for me, it's possible that it did so for a lot of other people. I'm sure there were some individuals for which that was not the case, but I think there were probably a lot of individuals who were pushed into, you have to make a living, you have to make a living, you have to make a living. And they get to retirement and discover that they've never made a life. They have made a living, they have the income, they have the paychecks, they have the retirement income. They don't have anything of which they genuinely feel proud. They don't have any skills or accomplishments that make them glad to be alive. They don't have anything that inspires them when they wake up in the morning. To think that this is an opportunity to do more of what I love, instead of simply punching a time clock, getting a paycheck, having a nice house and a nice car and a nice family, and that's all good to a point. But if you leave behind the unique treasures that I believe the divine is hidden within each person, it's like Thoreau in his book about life on Walden Pond, coming to the point of death and realizing you've never lived. The challenge of weaving through all this, I guess, is how do we get around ego issues? How do we explain to someone that when I disagree with you, it's not saying you're a bad person, it's not saying you're worthless, it's just saying that I noticed something that isn't correct. I don't have any emotional need to be right, but I do have sufficient intelligence in certain areas to know when something simply isn't right. I know that when you wire an outlet, the black wire goes here and the white wire goes there and the ground wire goes there. And if you put them in any other configuration, it's not going to work. Not because I decided it should be that way, but simply because that's the way electricity works. It's not about me being right, it's about the outlet being right so that it doesn't hurt anyone, so that it provides the energy in the right way, in the safe way, to the people who need to use it. So on one hand, we have the person who is hoping nobody finds out that they don't know what they're presenting themselves as knowing. And somehow I wish there was a way to reach out to that person and say, no, you're loved unconditionally. You can tell me the truth and I'm not going to punish you for it. And if it's gone on for a long time because once you got into it, you didn't know how to get out, well, I can be understanding of that, but let's talk about it and let's figure out how we can make life work for you. In a similar sort of way, growing up and, for gay and lesbian people growing up and being taught by the world in 100 different subtle ways to hate themselves, that every single movie you see, when it's the happily ever after, it's always a man and a woman. It's never a same-sex couple. That for quite a number of years, whenever a gay or lesbian person was depicted in a Hollywood movie, that person was specifically presented as a villain or a psychologically dysfunctional person, something tragic, someone who would meet a tragic end. It was never the happily ever after. And so when one is growing up and identifying with those sorts of characters, it leaves this question somewhere in the back of your mind: is that what's going to happen to me? Am I going to be denied any happily ever after? Am I not as good as everyone else because of something about myself that I can't change? On one hand, I want to create, I want to help create, and I want to find others who want to help create a world where people can find their truth and live in their truth as happy, well-adjusted, creative, productive individuals, because those are the individuals that bless all of humanity. On the other hand, we have people who are so invested in the denial and the way things have been and the stuckness, and they're so afraid that someone might not forgive them or might not understand. And, in defense of that, I would say that sometimes people don't understand, and sometimes people are not accepting. At this point, I've been pretty much estranged from my entire family for perhaps 30 years or more, because they simply are not willing to accept an openly gay person into their lives. And I simply told them, well, if you ever change your mind, let me know. Otherwise, I will respect your choice and I'll stay away. So I have no family at Christmas time with whom to celebrate. It's just the way it worked out. Is it good or is it bad? Well, there are positives and negatives about it. Another thing is, because of being a creative anomaly, I too often resemble the starving artist, I guess. Being a creative person and quirky because of autism, it's been very difficult for me to find adequate employment. I read somewhere that actually 85% of high-functioning autistics are unemployed, not because they have nothing to contribute, but because the world that does the hiring doesn't know how to integrate them and doesn't know how to accommodate them and doesn't understand that it's really not that difficult. They're hiding behind systems as they are and as they were, and it's strangling the life out of humanity. And they're trying to make sure that nobody finds out, when in fact, if everybody did find out, most people would be able to deal with it. There would be a few people who would not, and there would be some bumps in the road, and there might be some losses to work through. But there's a whole lot of other positive possibilities also. The negatives are not the only possibilities. And we can't go through life assuming that everybody is going to hate us and attack us and be opposed to us just being honest with them. That cuts us off from all the good things as well. The fact that anyone can drive down any highway in the country depends to a certain extent on being able to trust that every other car on that highway is going to stay in its own lane. If you couldn't trust that, you couldn't drive on a highway, because you would be certain that every single car you saw was going to smash into you and cause loss and damage and so forth. That would be psychologically overwhelming in rush hour traffic, to look at 500 cars just within your immediate vision and assume that they were all your enemy and you were in the middle of this all alone. It's an impossible situation. Trust is essential to a functioning world. We have to trust other cars to stay in their lanes. We have to trust other people to be intelligent and forgiving. And most of them are. And a few of them are not. And we will find ways to recover from whatever injuries those few do. But we cannot base our lives on the few that are going to hurt us, or we will miss the blessing of all the relationships that will help us, and of all the relationships that we could help, all the people to whom we can become valuable by having the courage to be truthful and honest and showing an interest in learning. Because every single person you meet can be your teacher in some area or another. There is something that every single person knows that you don't. And whatever conversation you can have with them will add that much to your knowledge and understanding, and possibly also to your ability to cope with challenges, or what do I do in such and such situation, and if I can't handle it, who do I call? No one lives long enough to figure all of this out. To the extent that we anchor ourselves to what we already know and don't move any further beyond it and sacrifice truth for the sake of convention, we limit ourselves and we put our lives into teeny tiny pathetic boxes. We don't live the life that we were born to live. I don't think that is a sentence, I don't think that's a fate I could wish on my worst enemy. What I wish for every person, especially those who have hurt me, is compassion, is sensitivity, is the ability to understand that it's not about playing king of the hill and it's not about controlling others and I need to make you do what I want you to do. It's about understanding that this person is a resource and a potential teacher, and that if you support that person, you will wind up better off. But if you do not support that person, then every treasure and every bit of riches that is hidden in that person, every potential that person has, you essentially take all of that out of your own bank account and throw it away. Because without supporting and loving and embracing that person, none of that resource will ever be yours. And I wish I could think of the perfect thing to say to make it all better for every person in every situation. I can't go back and fix the situations in my own life where I've been the victim of those sorts of situations. But there have been other times as well where I think I answered too quickly. And I may have tried to give somebody an opportunity, but I didn't give it to them in the way that they understood. And because I didn't give it to them in the way they understood, they interpreted me incorrectly also, and we didn't get to have the dialogue to understand each other enough to become teammates. And I could say I apologize to every such person, but I don't know who they are, because if we don't let someone know what's going on, it becomes extremely difficult for them to ever figure out how to work around it and how to deal with it. It kind of becomes a conundrum and a catch-22 in a way, because on one hand you have a person who may not know what they need to know, and you know it, but they don't know that you know it. And if they come at me adversarially because of my autism, I will have difficulty responding to that, and if they drive me into a meltdown, then I'll be that much less able to communicate with them. The first thing I think every autistic needs to understand in those moments is you are safe and you are loved. In some of those situations, as I reflect on them, I was not loved, and that stopped a whole lot of wonderful things from happening. The challenge to me now is figuring out how to move beyond that experience and beyond that memory and beyond the smallness of the ego issues that were present there, to find the self that is bigger than the corner in which I was trapped, which I thought I was trapped. That they said, this is what you have to do, and thank goodness I had enough presence of mind to say, no, I don't necessarily have to, and I found another option that perhaps frustrated them because they couldn't control me, but it wasn't that I was trying to avoid their control, it was that I was trying to find something that worked. And I guess what it all comes down to is bringing that truth and integrating it with our individuality and integrating it with each other so that we can hold hands through every challenge that arises and come up with something better than, well, to end on a light note. At one time, shortly after high school, I spent 5 months in a youth ministry training school. And one of the few quotes I remember from that school, it was a very questionable experience in a number of ways, but there was one point where a minister made a joke and said something about the status quo, and someone said, "What's the status quo?" And he said, "That's Greek for the mess we've got ourselves into." And maintaining the status quo is too often about maintaining the mess. Within each of us and collectively within all of us, as we work together, we can do way better than the status quo. Thank you for watching.